Since the release of its first season back in August of 2014, it didn't take long for Outlander to become one of the biggest fantasy titles in the history of the Starz network. And with an impressive cast of characters, coupled with a rather dramatic story, this is really no surprise. But which moments from the past 5 seasons are the most memorable, according to Outlander author Diana Gabaldon? For all this and more, stay tuned. First of all, the celebrated author had a lot to say about Claire and Jamie's wedding, and this makes complete sense considering just how much effort Diana put into the establishment of their relationship in the novels of the same name. For those of you who don't know, the casting crew even called on Gabaldon to okay the casting of both Sam Heughan and Caitriona Balfe, as they would essentially be the crux of Outlander for as long as the show remained on television. And believe it or not, but Gabaldon was actually not too pumped about having Heughan portray the role of Jamie Fraser. To her, Jamie was supposed to be far more rugged than what Sam could bring. But when she finally saw Sam and Caitriona together for the first time, the immense chemistry that ran between the two stars absolutely blew her socks off. So when she was finally asked to name her top moments from the show, she couldn't help but refer to the 7th episode of the first season, which saw Jamie and Claire finally tying the knot. Since the entirety of the franchise revolves around the relationship between Jamie and Claire Fraser, it makes sense that this would be one of her favorite moments. It allowed her to see the fantastical relationship she had created in her novels for the first time on the silver screen. And according to her, she couldn't have asked for anything more from Sam or Caitriona. This romantic moment was far from her only memorable clip, though. In fact, she has a love for the Jacobite battle that celebrates her taste for violence. We are, of course, referring to the Battle of Culloden, which was by far one of the most violent scenes in the history of the show. And according to Gabaldon, it's a scene that really added to her vision of how things looked back when she was writing her novels. Seeing the fear on Jamie's face as explosions were being set off around him was a massive turning point for the audience, who had to that point been focused on his relationship with Claire. Not surprising considering how the show revolves around them, but the juxtaposition between the wedding and battle really forced everyone into feeling more for the Frasers than they thought they would. So when Jamie finally snaps to his senses and asks for the command to charge, everyone has been reminded of exactly what he is fighting for. Not just freedom, but the love of his life. According to Gabaldon, this wasn't the only fascinating aspect about the battle, though. In her own words, it's a wonderful picture of what makes men fascinating and admirable, and what makes women strong and admirable against a background of danger and death. It's in these terrifying moments that we really learn about the true nature of our favorite characters, after all, and the tenacity with which Jamie and the rest of the rebels fought to secure their place in the world was something to behold. No wonder Diana considers this to be one of her favorites. The separation between Claire and Jamie was also given its time in the sun. According to Gabaldon, this is what really convinced Claire to do what she needed to do. For those of you who might have forgotten, episode 4 of season 3, titled Of Lost Things, saw a slight separation between the two lovebirds. In a flash, Claire was back in her own time period, looking for any mention of Jamie in the history books to confirm that he had survived the Battle of Culloden. Jamie, on the other hand, goes on to work in Hellwater as a groomsman, where he impregnates Geneva Dunsany, which results in the birth of his son, William. Despite the massive difference between the two in terms of both time and space, they still remained connected to one another, and this portrayal perfectly summed up the theme of the show that has reared its head from the very first episode of the franchise. In the end, Outlander is all about the undying love between Claire and Jamie, who, despite being separated by around 200 years, fall for one another and start their own incredible family. Their separation adds to the allure of their relationship relationship and shows while life may go on, they will never forget about one another. And as much as we'd love for the two lovebirds to live happily ever after, it's the ups and downs of their relationship that really proves just how much they feel for one another. It may be heartbreaking, but it's real. The Ballad of Roger Mac was by far one of her favorite episodes, though. A fact that was somewhat confirmed by her when she went on to state that she couldn't pick a specific moment from the episode because it was all so well done. She's not the only one to put episode 7 of season 5 at the top of the list of best Outlander episodes to date, as many audience members agree with Gabaldon that The Ballad of Roger Mac is an unforgettable masterpiece. It's within this episode that we see the Regulators taking on the King's Army in the Battle of Alamance for the first time, but surprisingly enough, it was Jaime's failed attempt to convince his old friend Murtaugh to lay down his weapons that really stole the show. Because of his commitment to and love of freedom, Murtaugh takes off to fight for what he believes in, which unfortunately leads to the demise of the fan-favorite character. This results in a shocked Jaime carrying his body back to the makeshift infirmary, where Claire and Brianna await his return. The emotions that flow during this scene are unbelievable and must have taken some intense method acting from the cast on that day. It also showed the audience that despite the immense love that Jaime and Claire have for one another, the death of a close friend is something that can be devastating on a relationship. Luckily for Jaime, Claire was more than willing to accept his behavior, and in the end, this has always been her strength. In other Outlander news, Caitriona Balfe isn't exactly happy with her time on set, and considering how she is the leading lady of the show, this could be something that gets in the way of the success of Outlander in the seasons to come. You see, according to reports, Caitriona has expressed the desire to direct an episode in the coming days. She feels like she has a solid grasp on her character, having already portrayed Claire Fraser for a grand total of 5 seasons. She also knows everything there is to know about her fellow stars and the fan base that they're representing each and every season. But Caitriona's request has somewhat fallen on deaf ears. As such, fans shouldn't be expected to see her work behind the scenes just yet, with her request to direct being denied. We have to remember that both Sam and Caitriona work as producers for the show, as well as the leading cast members, so it makes sense that the showrunners would prefer to not give the star more than she could possibly handle. We wouldn't want to see a lack of engagement from Claire because Caitriona is too concerned with another scene after all, but she appears to be more than capable in the long run, so we really do hope that the men and women behind Outlander give her a chance in the coming days. Mention has also been made of the effects of the coronavirus pandemic, which has apparently gotten in the way of her directorial debut on Outlander before. Lastly, fans have been asking for the ages of Claire and Jaime in season 6. The show can be quite confusing considering just how many timelines it deals with in a single season. After all, with some time periods even spanning over several centuries. We're talking about a time-hopping couple after all, which is sometimes easy to forget. We know that season 5 of the franchise has both Claire and Jaime in their 50s and shows them preparing Fraser's Ridge for the upcoming American Revolution that season 6 is likely to deal with in its entirety. In other words, season 6 isn't exactly far removed from the last installment, which sets Claire in her late 50s, with Jaime being around 55 in age. But since Claire was born in 1918, with Jaime being born in 1721, the pair are actually 197 years apart. But like the vampire novels and shows we have come to love, we don't really count that separation. In our hearts, the duo are merely 5 years apart, with Claire pushing 60. And there you have it, everything you need to know about Outlander and how author Diana Gabaldon feels about the show. What do you want to see in season 6 though? And how excited are you for the end of Droughtlander? Feel free to let us know in the comments section down below.